Welcome to Tossing Grenade the Windmills. Windmills.
Hi, welcome to the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. Just a quick note on the status of some of my current projects. 2 of my novels are being edited by Fiona Skye, who is a fantastic editor. Her editing services are actually available, and you can find out more information about them at fiona-skye.com. That's FIONA-SKYE.com. And if you're currently working on self-publishing your own short stories or novels, like I now am, I cannot recommend her enough. In fact, actually, the content, among other things, that will be taking place after Precyber, which, in case you're wondering, has not really been edited except by Ken and myself, will be my third novel, Grenade Man vs. the Zombies. I did a couple of chapters a long time ago, but those were not edited. Believe me, you will notice the difference in my writing when a professional editor has had their hand on it. The 2 novels that she's currently working on are Grenade Man vs. the Zombies, which is set in the same universe as the original movie script that is currently being shown on my blog, Tossing Grenades at Windmills at the same name, and Forever West, which is probably, with editing, becoming the best thing I've ever written. It's barely managed to pass Odysseus, but the editing really makes it shine. Anyway, we've got a total of 55 chapters. We're currently on chapter 46. After that, we'll probably be changing the format to include a couple more short stories, but also mixing in the next novel after that. Anyway, I'll start reading, and I hope you enjoy. Precyber by Kim Leitner and T.C. Ricks. Chapter 46. The ambush plan pleased Clarke. Fidel had led them across country on some of the worst roads Clarke had ever imagined. However, the end results placed Horse and Clarke at the end of a canyon road ahead of their quarry. Near the far end, an old couple lived in a shack. Clarke could not fathom why or how they lived there, but he didn't care either. He pointed a gun at them and told them to get lost. Horse started setting up explosives before they even left. The explosives near the shack went off like clockwork just as the 2 mercenaries approached in their open-air jeep. Horse blew another improvised explosive at the other end, which brought rocks tumbling down on the road. It was an obvious and poor trap, the kind of thing a few bandits might try to shake down some tourists for money. Of course, Mike was a professional merc, so he would look on top of the canyon for an ambush. That was just what Clarke had hoped they would do. Mike walked back into the canyon slowly, having the greater courage of the 2. The sun was setting just behind him, casting long shadows on the twisted canyon walls. Mike looked around cautiously. This was definitely an ambush, but the bandits almost assuredly wanted them alive. He listened carefully. Then Carl used his subvocal mic. "Mike, I think I see him coming. Can you go forward another 20 feet? Mike swore silently. That put him in the most dangerous part of the canyon, but he had to flush these guys out. Mike had no intention of letting a couple of 2-bit bandits take him, but he also knew some of the 2-bit bandits out here had decades of practice at what they did for a living. Either way, they had to die. Mike did not want any unnecessary witnesses. People like them had an unhealthy habit of showing up and testifying later. He heard an explosion, followed by a shout from Carl. Mike recognized the sound of a flashbang grenade. A flashbang? What the hell were bandits doing with a flashbang? Right then, Mike knew that there were no local bandits out there. Horse whispered to Clarke, "It didn't stop him. He shielded his eyes. He's getting away. I'll go after him." Clarke shook his head as they slowly moved behind Mike into the box canyon. "No. Let him get away. He might sneak behind us." "Focus on the one we have trapped." Horse swore but followed Clarke into the twisted canyon. The shadows made by the twilight at the edge of the canyon made it difficult for Mike to tell how many he faced, but after the flashbang, he expected them to be well armed. "¿Quién eres?" Mike shouted in Spanish. The answer came back in English. "Justice." Who were these guys? The Justice League of America or something? Mike shouted back, "What the fuck? Do you remember me?" Mike had occasionally had this dream before. He didn't really lose any sleep over what he did, but it did cause stress every once in a while. Everyone had nightmares. Normal people had them about missing work. Mike had them about the dead returning to life, but he had never expected it from this hit. "Clarke, you saurian. Is this some kind of a joke?" "No joke, shithead. You've got answers, and I want them." "Of course," Mike lied as he slowly started climbing up the edge of the canyon. Carl had probably been smart enough to get the hell out of Dodge. He wanted to think it was operational necessity of warning the boss, but really, he knew that Carl's loyalty was not that strong. Mike couldn't blame him, really. He might have done the same thing. The irony was that Carl had lied to him about hitting Clarke on that bridge. By all rights, Carl should be the one stuck in here. A gunshot rang off right close to his hand. Too close. Mike felt a little fear. He liked having an advantage in a fight. He needed to find one soon. Then the canyon began to fill with the sound of music. "Quiet!" Clarke whispered to Horse. "What?" "I hear something." They both went silent. Horse whispered, "Yeah, I hear it too." "It's his PCA. He left it back in his car. I think it might have just what we need, including what the hell they're planning next." "Go! I'll keep them bottled up here." "Right." Clarke almost volunteered to stay, but both of them knew that Horse stood about as much chance of hacking that phone as a vulture of waltzing. Clarke had really wanted to kill Mike just as well. Such thinking was unhealthy. Mike had kept quiet himself. The canyon walls carried sound really well, so he had been able to hear everything that Clarke and Horse were saying. He did have a lot of damaging files on that thing. He had encrypted most of them, but the right people could decrypt them, and so far Clarke had proven sufficingly effective. He quietly began to creep to the front of the canyon. Climbing made too much noise. Horse fired several shots, which barely missed. Mike fired back with both pistols blaring. Mike always carried lots of ammo, so he used a lot for the sheer psychological shock factor. 22 rounds made their way to the rocks in less than 15 seconds as Horse was forced back behind cover. Mike reloaded with fresh clips and immediately opened fire again, using a torrent of bullets to move forward. Horse kept his head down in response. Mike then deliberately allowed the sound of both pistols to make an empty clicking sound, dropping to the ground. Horse moved fast. Mike had to give him that. He was almost fast enough, but not quite. Horse shot 6 rounds rapidly, one of them hitting Mike in the right arm, forcing him to drop one of the empty pistols. What Horse had failed to do was shoot the left arm, which held the third fully loaded pistol. At point-blank range, despite the shadows, Mike did not miss. Not today. Today was an exception. 2 shots quickly ended the encounter. Horse fell to the ground with a thud, one bullet in the heart and the other in the forehead. Mike pulled himself up and noticed the guy's eyes open in disbelief, still staring. Mike hated it when they stared at him. The arm shot was bad, but he had experienced worse. No, now he had to deal with Clarke, and that promised to be considerably more satisfying. However, as Mike wondered whether killing Clarke would stop his occasional bad dreams, he fell, quite uncontrollably, back down on the ground. Damn it! Mike realized now his body had gone into shock. He had so focused his mind on the killing shot, he had not noticed the other 4 bullets that he had taken in the legs. The guy had only missed once. He had riddled Mike's lower half. In fact, at least one of the wounds was bleeding dangerously. Mike grabbed 2 empty pistols, ripped some cloth off his field jacket, and fashioned tourniquets for both legs. That stemmed the bleeding, but it didn't quite stop it. Mike suspected one of the bullets had hit an artery. If so, he had little time left to live. Meanwhile, Clarke had reached the jeep and found one rucksack emitting an old Barry Manilow tune. Clarke knew he would have plenty of time to crack the files in his PCA back in Atlanta, but as usual, he could not resist taking a quick look. He dug into the ruck and pulled out the PCA. It was a hardened steel case designed for field use. Clarke had wanted that style himself once, but he could only afford the rubber aftermarket case. Clarke tapped on the screen to answer the phone. "Hello?" A low, African-American-sounding voice replied. "You ain't Mike." "No." "You ain't Mike." "No, he's dead," lied Clarke. "I'll be back for you when you least expect it," replied the voice before it disconnected. Clarke tried pulling up email, calendar, and a few other apps, but only the games lacked password protection. As Clarke pocketed the device, he heard the shots, a tirade of pistol shots. Horse had taught Clarke to recognize the gun by the sound, but Clarke still couldn't narrow it down very far. He could tell the shots were pistol shots, not .22 caliber, and probably not really high-powered. People who favored fast-firing generally like 9mm for their high magazine capacities, but the number of shots seemed off. Maybe it was a submachine gun? Next, Clarke heard 6 rifle shots, followed by 2 more, slightly different slightly different pistol shots. Horse carried a little snub-known .38 in his ankle holster, but those shots overlaced the rifle shots, so Clarke decided they must have come from Mike or Carl, whichever they had cornered at the moment. Unfortunately, Clarke distinctly heard the pistol shots last. If the shooting had ended, Horse must have lost. Clarke silently moved back over to where he'd heard the shots. He saw Horse's body first, then saw the mercenary tying something around his legs. There was little blood around Horse. Clarke thanked mercy that Horse must have died quickly. On the other hand, the mercenary, Mike/Carl, practically wallowed in it. His legs or arms were entirely coated in red. Clearly, Horse had hit him well. Clarke raised a rifle and walked over to the man. "Hands up, shithead." Mike wanted to kill Clarke, but realized that he would die shortly. As much as he wanted to kill the bastard, he wanted something else more, something Clarke would gladly do for him. Mike dropped his third gun and raised his hands. He said, "I turned to face you, but my legs have a slight cramp in them." Clarke replied, "I want to know why you were on license payroll." Mike laughed. "Huh. License hired people like me to kill people like you. Unfortunately, you didn't die when my partner shot you." "Wait, you were at the bridge on Atlanta?" Mike turned his head in time to see Clarke raising the rifle up to aim. "Wait!" Michael shouted with what little strength he had left. "Before you kill me, I need to tell you something." Clarke paused and lowered the rifle back to his hip. "What are you going to tell me that I won't find on your PCA anyway?" "Plenty, noob, plenty. Look, I'm about to die anyway, unless you plan to call in an evac helicopter in the next few minutes. Heck, even then I don't think I'd make it. Thing is, I've done some pretty amazing things. Things no one would believe possible, and I'm proud of that no matter what you may think of my profession. Only problem is, though, no one knows what I've done. I had to keep it all secret, but now, in the last few minutes of my life, I could tell you, and maybe have a chance of being remembered." Clarke listened to him and replied, "And why would I help your legacy?" Mike saw the doubt on Clarke's face. He had to convince him. "Because if you listen a few minutes longer, I'll tell you the password to my PCA. That could save you days of hacking. Look, I'm dead already. I just want credit for my accomplishments. I mean, how many people get to kill an American president and get away with it?" Clarke could feel the anger baiting him into rash action. This guy had killed Horse and shot Clarke. He deserved to die, and Clarke desperately wanted to do the deed. However, the rational part of his mind told him to wait and listen. "You're stalling." No, I can prove it." "And you work for the FBI, right? The whole bureaucracy is set out to find out my identity, and you could be the one to finally complete their mission." Clarke thought the mercenary was probably stalling for time, waiting for his buddy to circle back. Clarke needed to get moving, and this story was getting pretty far-fetched. He raised his rifle again. "You're claiming to have killed Hasselhoff? My aching ass." Mike replied, "I know you don't believe me, but the proof is in my PCA that I'm betting you have in your pocket. Kill me if you have to, but look on the PCA for a video called My Legacy. The password is lowercase d, death, uppercase K, night 01. Mike heard a branch snap nearby and panicked. He fired the rifle, which in turn bore a small hole through Mike's head and brain, killing him instantly. Mike slumped forward. Clarke ran. He made his way back to the Colombian-made off-road vehicle where Fidel and Che waited for him. "Horse is dead." They started the vehicle's gas engine and drove Clarke back to the port city. Clarke slumped in the back seat. He pulled the mercenary's PCA from his pocket. He didn't know whether he had just killed Mike or Carl, but perhaps the PCA would tell him. He entered the password, Death Knight 01, and found, surprisingly, that it worked. He went to the phone settings and figured out that it must be Mike's phone. Then he opened the gallery app and scanned the video. My Legacy. It was the oldest on the device. The timestamp placed it on the day of Hasselhoff's assassination. Someone he knew intimately, since he did. After all, he worked at the FBI. He opened the video and watched. The camera appeared to be installed on a rifle scope, and it looked at a campaign stump speech. Hasselhoff had made the day of his assassination in Bethesda, Maryland. Clarke held his breath. Then the video looked eerily like the news footage of the assassination, only the angle differed. He saw a flash on the screen, followed by a blurry but faint smoke. When the smoke cleared enough to see, the president lay on the stage surrounded by security personnel. Then abruptly the video ended. Either Mike had actually killed the president, or he had to know who did. Clarke wondered just how deep this rabbit hole went.
This has been the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. I'm Thomas Ricks. Music by Melanie Ricks. Voices by Skip Huffman and Josie Bergen-Lawson. Copyright 2012.
Kenneth Leitner
And Red Anvil Amalgamated.
to fight the forces of evil.